Somewhere deep within the cypress swamps of Louisiana, there is said to be a sealed archive the church has never publicly recognized. Inside it are 12 birth certificates, all dated between 1847 and 1852, each listing the same father, a man who was considered property, not a human being. In October of 1852, the Vatican received a letter that was instantly locked away under the highest level of secrecy, a classification used only for matters that could threaten the very foundations of faith. Witnesses later claimed that when the Archbishop of New Orleans opened the package containing evidence in the Convent of the Sacred Mercy, he openly wept for 3 hours straight before giving the order to burn every document. Yet, somehow, fragments of it all managed to survive, preserved in private collections, in fading journals, and in whispered testimonies recorded by those who refused to let such truth die in silence. Officially, the church still maintains that the convent closed simply due to financial troubles. But the 12 women who lived there and took their vows disappeared from every church record on the exact same November night, erased as if they had never existed to begin with. Before we go any further into the story of the Sacred Mercy Convent, and the man whose very existence the church tried to eliminate, I need to ask you something. If you're listening from Louisiana, anywhere in the Deep South, or from any part of this country where hidden histories still echo to the walls of old buildings, leave a comment and tell me where you're from. This channel lives because of people like you who crave the truth that history tried so hard to bury. So hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear has never been told in full before. And stories like this deserve to be remembered, even when the truth makes us uneasy. What happened at Sacred Mercy didn't begin with scandal. It began with what the people of St. Landry Parish believed was an extraordinary act of charity. St. Martinville stood like a small pearl of French civilization tucked into the humid embrace of the Teche country, about 23 miles south of Opelousas, where the bayou Teche wound its way through sugar plantations and cypress groves dense enough to swallow the afternoon sun. The town had been founded by French aristocrats fleeing the Revolution, and by 1842 it still held tightly to its European refinement despite the punishing Louisiana heat that wilted collars and ruined expensive imported silks. At its center rose the Church of St. Martin, Delaware Tours, its steeple visible for miles across the flat delta landscape, a beacon of Catholic faith in a region where voodoo drums sometimes throbbed from the slave quarters after midnight, and where French, English, Spanish, and Creole blended into a linguistic stew that left outsiders bewildered. 3 miles north of town, reachable only by a narrow shell road that turned into impassable mud during the rainy season, stood the Convent of the Sacred Mercy, built in 1838 by Madame Celeste Duval, a wealthy widow with no children. The convent was her attempt to purchase a place in heaven through extravagant piety. Her sugar fortune was so vast that she believed building a religious refuge would balance the scales. The convent was meant to house a modest community of teaching sisters who would instruct the daughters of wealthy planters, while also offering Christian lessons to enslaved children on Sundays, a progressive idea for its time, though one that still refused the notion that black and white children should ever share the same classroom or even the same catechism. The building itself followed the West Indies style, raised on brick piers to protect against flooding, with wide galleries on both levels designed to capture whatever breeze dared to stir the heavy air. Madame Duval demanded tall French windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, plaster walls painted a soothing yellow that reminded her of Provence, and a chapel decorated with stained glass shipped all the way from Lyon at enormous expense. The grounds covered 12 acres, gardens, kitchen plots, a small iron-fenced cemetery, and at the far edge of property, hidden behind a screen of live oaks draped in Spanish moss, a cluster of outbuildings, the kitchen, laundry, storage rooms, and living quarters for the 3 enslaved people who maintained the estate. By 1845, the convent was home to exactly 12 sisters, all under the age of 35, all from respectable French and Creole families. They took perpetual vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Their days followed the ancient rhythm of the canonical hours: matins before dawn, lauds at sunrise, prime, terce, sext, nun, vespers, and finally compline before the great silence of night. Between prayers, they taught basic literacy to the daughters of planters, embroidered elaborate altar cloths, tended their gardens, and lived a life carefully walled off from worldly concerns. They were governed by Mother Superior Therese Barron, a 52-year-old woman whose family owned one of the largest sugar operations in the parish and whose iron-willed faith was known across the diocese. The 3 enslaved people who served the convent had been donated by wealthy benefactors: an elderly woman named Hella who ran the kitchen, her daughter Margot who handled the laundry, and for the heavy labor, maintenance of the grounds, repairs, chopping firewood, clearing drainage ditches, a young man whose name would one day appear on those 12 birth certificates. His name was Matias. He had been purchased specifically for the convent in March of 1845 from an estate sale in New Iberia. He was 22 years old, with a remarkably light complexion caused by generations of forced unions between enslaved women and their owners. Standing 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying a quiet intelligence that made certain white men uneasy while convincing others he'd make a fine house servant, Matias was bought for $650, a price Madame Dufsat's steward considered fair for a healthy male in his prime. The bill of sale described him as a likely Negro man, sound of body, strong of limb, skilled in carpentry and gardening, of docile temperament. What the document did not mention, because the truth of the man's life had no place in the property ledger, was that Matias could read a dangerous skill he had secretly learned from the overseer's daughter on his previous plantation. It also failed to note that his mother had been sold away when he was 7 years old, or that he had watched his father beaten to death for daring to look a white man in the eye. It said nothing of the scars across his back from a whipping he endured at 15 for asking permission to visit his sister on a neighboring plantation. None of that mattered to the men who bought and sold him. Those pieces of his life held no value. His value, as far as the world around him was concerned, lived entirely in his muscles, his youth, and the years of labor they believed he had ahead of him. The sisters treated him with the distant benevolence their faith required toward all of God's creatures. They did not address him directly. Such familiarity would have been improper. Instead, they issued their instructions through Mother Superior Therese, who passed them along with the same crisp, disciplined efficiency she applied to every practical matter. He slept in a small room attached to the tool shed, ate his meals alone, and was expected to make himself nearly invisible unless summoned for specific tasks. He repaired the chapel roof after winter storms tore at the shingles. He maintained the drainage ditches that kept the land from flooding. He tended the gardens that fed the convent. In every functional sense, he existed like a ghost, one who performed quiet miracles of labor, but was never allowed the dignity of soul that might demand acknowledgement. For 8 months, the arrangement held without disruption. But in November of 1845, something shifted in the fragile balance of the convent, though exactly when or how it began would later become a matter of fierce argument among the few who knew enough to argue at all. The first sign that something had gone terribly awry did not come from within the convent walls. It came instead from the watchful eyes of Monsieur Laurent Guidry, whose plantation bordered the convent grounds to the east. Guidry was a precise, orderly man, the kind who took his morning coffee on his gallery at exactly 6 o'clock every day, watching the sunrise while mentally inventorying the state of his fields, his livestock, his enslaved workers, and, by his measure, his entire moral universe. In late April of 1846, he noticed that Sister Marie Therese, who often tended the convent's herb garden and was easily visible from his property line, had grown noticeably stouter. By June, 3 other sisters he occasionally glimpsed through the trees showed the same unmistakable change in their figures. By August, when he mentioned it to his wife Deline over supper, she silenced him at once with a horrified look. "You must be mistaken," she whispered, lowering her voice even though they were alone in the dining room. "Such things are not possible." "I know what I saw," Guidry insisted. 4 of them, perhaps 5, all showing the same condition. "Then they must be ill," Deline said firmly. "A swelling sickness. Perhaps. The air affects people strangely in this climate. But you will not speak of this to anyone, Laurent. To suggest something like that about women who had devoted their lives to Christ, it is not only scandalous, It is blasphemous. Guidry said nothing more to his wife, but during confession the following Saturday, he mentioned his concerns to Father Dominique Roussel, the parish priest. He framed it carefully as a concern about possible illness among the sisters, an issue that might require pastoral attention. Father Roussel, 73 years old and partially deaf, had long ago developed the useful habit of interpreting troubling information in the most harmless way possible. He assured Guidry that the sisters were under the excellent care of Mother Superior Therese. Yes, the Louisiana climate was especially hard on women of delicate constitution, and with sufficient prayer, surely any small ailment would resolve. What Father Roussel did not do was visit the convent. He did not question Mother Therese about the sisters' health. He did not allow himself to consider, even privately, the terrible possibility that had rooted itself in Guidry's mind. By October of 1846, the truth could no longer be cushioned by wishful thinking or smoothed over by gentle interpretation. Sister Genevieve went into labor on the night of October 12th, 3 weeks earlier than the sisters had expected. Her cries pierced the gardens, high, terrified sound from a woman who had never imagined herself capable of such agony and had no understanding of what her own body was doing. Hella, the elderly enslaved woman who managed the kitchen and who had delivered countless babies in the slave quarters over 60 years, was summoned to help. She found Sister Genevieve in a small room on the second floor, surrounded by 5 other sisters whose own swollen bellies made it clear this incident was not isolated. The baby, a girl, was born just after midnight. Light-skinned, unmistakably a mixed race, she carried Matias's high cheekbones and Sister Genevieve's delicate hands. 3 days later, Sister Marie Claire delivered a boy. By Christmas of 1846, 6 infants had been born within the convent walls, 4 girls and 2 boys, all healthy, all bearing undeniable signs of who their father was. No doctor was summoned. No priest was called to baptize them. No birth records were filed at the parish courthouse. The babies simply existed, wrapped in blankets cut from old altar cloths and cared for by sisters whose religious training had not prepared them to soothe crying infants or tend to milk swollen bodies. They wailed through the night offices. They nursed during hours meant for silent meditation. They transformed the convent from an ordered sanctuary of devotion into a strange fusion of monastery and nursery, where women who had renounced motherhood found themselves elbow-deep in sour milk and soiled swaddling. And through it all, Matias continued his labor as if nothing had changed, repairing fences, chopping wood, tending the garden. His face remained an unreadable mask, revealing nothing of what he knew, thought, or felt about the catastrophe unfolding around him. Mother Superior Therese knew silence could no longer suffice. The situation demanded action, but what kind of action? The question presented a theological and practical dilemma her 52 years of steadfast faith had not prepared her to solve. On a January morning in 1847, she summoned Matias to her office, the first time she had spoken to him directly in the entire 22 months he had lived on the property. He stood in the doorway, cap in hand, his eyes fixed respectfully on a point beyond her left shoulder, as custom required. "You understand the gravity of what has happened," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am," he answered quietly. "These women took vows before God, sacred vows. They renounced the world, the flesh, all earthly attachments. What has happened here is not merely sin. It is sacrilege of the highest order." Matias remained silent. What could he possibly say? That he had not initiated any of what had happened? That in those encounters, he had been as much a piece of property as he was in every other part of his life? That consent was not a concept applied to someone who could be sold or killed at the whim of the people who owned him. None of those truths would have mattered to the woman sitting across from him. Her face was pale and drawn, tightened by the weight of a scandal threatening everything she had tried so hard to build. 6 children have already been born, she went on. 6 more are expected before summer. The church cannot know of this. The diocese cannot know of this. If word reaches New Orleans, If the Archbishop learns what has transpired, the convent will be shut down. The sisters will be stripped of their vows and cast out in disgrace. And the Church itself will suffer a wound to its moral authority that could take generations to heal. She paused, studying with eyes that held no warmth, but also, strangely, no hatred. "You cannot remain here," she said at last. "Your presence is a constant reminder of our shame. Yet you also cannot be sold. Whoever purchased you might eventually discover why you were sold, and questions will be asked, questions we cannot afford to answer." Her voice tightened. "Do you understand the position you occupy? You are both the instrument of our ruin and the only witness whose testimony must never be heard." The solution Mother Superior Therese devised was as pragmatic as it was cruel. Matias would remain on the property, but he would be moved to the outermost edge of the grounds, to a small cabin that had once housed a former groundskeeper, buried so deep in the surrounding cypress grove that even the sound of the chapel bell barely reached it. He would continue maintaining the property, but only at night or in the earliest hours before the sisters emerged for lauds, or during their afternoon rest when the galleries lay empty. He would become an even deeper shadow than before, a phantom whose labor sustained the convent, while his face had to vanish entirely from the lives he had already changed beyond repair. The babies, meanwhile, created their own impossible dilemma. They could not remain in the convent forever. Children demanded explanations that would become impossible as they grew older and needed education, social status, legal identities. Yet they could not simply be discarded like an unwanted object. Regardless of their origins, they were baptized souls, and church doctrine was uncompromising about the sanctity of life. Even lives born from circumstances the church would rather condemn. Over the next 18 months, as the remaining 6 sisters delivered their infants, Mother Superior Therese discreetly arranged for each child to be placed with families in distant parishes, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Mobile, even as far as Natchez. The families were told different stories, that the children were orphans from a convent in France, that their mothers had died in childbirth, or that they were the illegitimate offspring of wealthy planters desperate to protect their reputations. Money changed hands, donations, to ensure the children would be raised in good Catholic homes, properly educated, and perhaps even allowed to pass into white society if their complexions made that deception possible. By August of 1848, all 12 children had been born and quietly removed from sacred mercy. The last, a boy born to Sister Angelique on the Feast of the Assumption, August 15th, was placed with a Natchez family who believed he was the orphan son of a French planter and his quadroon mistress. The convent returned on the surface to its former order. The sisters rose for matins. They recited their offices. They taught planter daughters their letters and catechism. They maintained the appearance that nothing extraordinary had ever taken place. But something essential had cracked within their carefully structured life. The vow of silence, once a cherished spiritual discipline, now weighed on them like a psychological burden almost too heavy to carry. They could not speak about what had taken place. Not to each other, not in confession, not even in the hidden corners of their own prayers. The unspoken secret pressed on them like humid air before a storm, growing heavier with every passing season. Sister Genevieve, the first to give birth, began suffering headaches so severe she sometimes remained in bed for days. Sister Marie Claire stopped eating and wasted away until Mother Superior practically forced broth into her just to keep her alive. Sister Therese Meline, the youngest of 23, began scratching her arms until they bled. Leaving thin scars she tried desperately to hide beneath her sleeves. And Matias, isolated in his cabin at the far edge of property, lived in a silence so complete he sometimes went days without speaking a single word. He chopped wood, cleared brush, repaired fences under moonlight, and in the long hours when sleep refused to come, he wondered whether God had cursed him or saved him, and whether there was any real difference between the two. The letter that eventually reached the Vatican was not written by Mother Superior Therese, but by Sister Jean Baptiste, the last conceived and the one most tormented by her role in the events. She was 31, the daughter and notary from Lafayette. And before taking her vows, she had been the intellectual pride of her family, a woman who read Latin poetry and kept meticulous journals documenting her spiritual growth. In the spring of 1850, 2 years after the last birth, Sister Jean Baptiste began writing an account of what had happened at Sacred Mercy. She wrote alone in her cell late at night, by the dim glow of a single candle. She did not write it in French, her natural language, but in Latin, the universal tongue of the Church, because she intended it not for local authorities but for Rome itself. Her account was extraordinary for its precision and its uncompromising honesty. She neither excused nor justified anything. She did not blame Matias, whom she described as an instrument of providence, or perhaps of our own collective madness. She did not invoke supernatural forces or demonic possession, those convenient explanations that might have deflected responsibility from human choices. She did not blame demonic influence or mysterious forces. Instead, she mapped out with almost clinical detachment the psychological and spiritual unraveling that had driven 12 women, bound by vows of lifelong chastity, to systematically violate those vows with the same man over nearly 3 years. It had all started, she wrote, with Sister Marie Tz, the first to break. Sister Marie Tz was 28, from a prominent St. Martinville family, and had taken her vows at 18 after a broken engagement convinced her that earthly love could never be trusted. She had been put in charge of the kitchen gardens, which meant she worked near Matias throughout the spring and summer of 1845, directing his labor while keeping the formal distance their roles required. But something had changed during those long hours in the garden, something Sister Jean Baptiste struggled to fully describe in her Latin prose. Sister Marie Tz had begun to see Matias not as property, but as a person, a man who laughed quietly at private jokes, who murmured to plants as he tended them, who once rescued a tiny bird tangled in the bean netting and released it with such gentle hands that it flew away unharmed. These small, unexpected acts of kindness revealed a depth of humanity that should have been irrelevant, but in the tight space of the garden became impossible to ignore. The actual seduction, if that word could even apply to an encounter between an enslaved man and a woman who held absolute power over him, happened in the tool shed on a scorching August afternoon, when the heat drove everyone else indoors for siesta. Sister Marie Tz had sought him out to ask about the tomato blight destroying the crop. What happened between them afterward was described by Sister Jean Baptiste in the coldest, most clinical terms possible, but the core truth was undeniable. Sister Marie Tz made the first physical move, and Matias, knowing refusal was both dangerous and nearly impossible, complied. What followed was not possession or mass hysteria, though both would later be suggested by those desperate to explain the unexplainable. What happened was subtler and far more damning. Sister Marie Tz confessed to Sister Angelique, searching for comfort, absolution, or simply someone who could carry part her burden. But confession between sisters was nothing like confession to a priest. There was no formal absolution, no penance, no structure for processing the scale of the sin. Instead, there was only the startling intimacy of a shared transgression. Sister Angelique, after hearing the details of Sister Marie Tz's encounter, found herself consumed by a curiosity she could neither name nor resist. Within a month, she too had sought out Matias. Once established, the pattern spread with the relentless logic of a plague inside a closed community. One sister confessed to another, seeking sympathy from women who share their vows and their isolation. But instead of forming a barrier against further sin, each confession made the next transgression feel less impossible, less unimaginable. By the winter of 1845, 8 of the 12 sisters had broken their vows with the same man. By spring, all 12 had followed. In her account, Sister Jean Baptiste tried to understand how this collective collapse had been possible. How could 12 educated, devout women from respectable families, all bound by sacred vows, participate in something so profoundly at odds with everything they believed? She explored every explanation she could think of: the convent's isolation, The way Matias's enslaved status placed him in a moral category that felt strangely separate from normal prohibitions. The fact that he could not refuse them or reveal anything without risking his life. The intense intimacy unique to cloistered communities. The way one act of transgression made the next seem less unthinkable. But in the end, she admitted she could not fully explain it. Not even herself. She could only record the events and leave it to the wisdom of the church to decide what they meant. The letter ended with a plea for intervention, for a full investigation, for proper penance, and a chance at genuine repentance. She sealed it, addressed it to Vatican's Sacred Congregation for Religious, and entrusted it to a visiting priest from New Orleans, who promised to deliver it safely to Rome. But Sister Jean Baptiste never knew that the priest, Father Almo Beer, never sent the letter. After reading it privately in his New Orleans quarters, he brought it to the Archbishop. The Archbishop summoned Mother Superior Terra, and the entire matter was handled not by Rome, but by the diocese, handled the same way such matters have been handled for centuries. With silence, with burial, with a deliberate erasure of every trace that anything improper had ever occurred. The Archbishop of New Orleans, Henri-Marie Laurin, was 68 and had weathered countless scandals in his 3 decades serving the church in Louisiana. He had managed a fallout from priests keeping concubines, from financial corruption, from the simmering hostility between French and American Catholics. But this was unlike anything he had faced, both in scale and in the potential to devastate the church's moral authority in a region where Protestant critics were eager for proof of Catholic corruption. He arrived at Sacred Mercy on October 20th, 1850, in a private carriage, accompanied only by Father Haber and a Jesuit priest named Father Michel Dauphine, chosen specifically for his mastery of canon law and his absolute discretion. They met Mother Superior Terra and the 12 sisters in the convent's chapter house, a bare room with whitewashed walls and narrow windows looking out over the gardens where everything had begun. The Archbishop did not sit. He stood at the head of the long wooden table, his hands clasped behind his back, his face betraying nothing of his thoughts or feelings. He was a political man, a man who understood power and the consequences of losing it. He approached the crisis not as a spiritual failing, but as a matter requiring careful containment and control. "What Sister Jean Baptiste has written, is it true?" he asked, his voice carrying the flat, controlled tone of a man determined not to reveal emotion. "It is true," Mother Superior Terra replied. She looked far older than her 54 years, her face deeply lined, her hands trembling faintly in her lap. "All 12 of you took part in this?" the Archbishop pressed. "All 12, Mother Superior Terra confirmed. "And the man involved, the slave Matias, he still lives on the property?" "He does." The Archbishop fell silent, staring out the window at something none of the others could see. "Where are the children?" he asked at last. Mother Superior Terra handed over a list, which Father Dauphine noted carefully in his leather-bound book. 12 names, 12 locations, 12 families who believed they had taken in orphans or illegitimate children in need of Christian homes. "They will have to be monitored," the Archbishop said quietly. "Discreetly. We must ensure that as they grow, no questions arise that could trace anything back here." "Of course, Your Grace," the Jesuit murmured. Then the Archbishop turned to the sisters, his eyes moving over each face. He saw no defiance, no denial, only a hollow exhaustion, the look of people who had carried an unbearable burden for so long they no longer remember how to stand straight. "You must understand," he said, "that what you did is not simply the breaking of vows. It is a scandal. If it became public, it will be used by enemies of the church to claim that Catholic religious life is corrupt at its core, that vows mean nothing, that the church's spiritual authority is a lie. Your actions endanger not only your souls, but the faith of countless believers who trust that consecrated religious are not ordinary sinners. Do you grasp the magnitude of this?" Several sisters began to cry. Sister Jean Baptiste stared at the table, pale but composed. "What would you have us do?" Sister Marie TZ whispered. The Archbishop inhaled slowly. "You will leave this place tonight. You will be sent to different convents across the region, one sister per community, never together. You will take new names. You will never speak of this again, not to one another, not in confession, not even on your deathbeds. You are now under a perpetual seal of silence. Breaking it will mean immediate excommunication and the loss of your souls. You will live out your lives in prayer and penance, but you will do so separately, and you will do so quietly. And Matias? Mother Superior TZ asked. The Archbishop's face hardened. The man presents a unique problem. He cannot be freed. Free men ask questions and repeat stories. He cannot be sold for the same reason. His continued existence threatens everything we are trying to protect. The implication hung in the room, unmistakable and cruel. Your Grace, Father Haber ventured, the Church cannot appear to condone murder. The Church condones nothing, the Archbishop replied coldly. The Church knows nothing. Sacred Mercy will close due to financial troubles. The property will be sold. And amid that confusion, a slave who once worked the grounds will simply disappear. These things happen in Louisiana. Slaves run away, or they meet with accidents, or they are sold quietly to distant territories. No one investigates closely. No one cares, as long as the official explanation is plausible. Sister Jean Baptiste rose abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You cannot intend to kill him, she said. He is innocent, more innocent than any of us. We held the power. We initiated everything. He had no choice. The Archbishop looked at her with something that might have been pity or contempt. Sister, your concern for the man you wronged is touching, but your opinion is not being requested. The decision is made. Father Dauphin will see it done with mercy and efficiency. I will not allow it, she cried. I wrote the letter to prevent injustice. If you carry out this plan, I will write to Rome again. I will expose everything. You will do nothing, the Archbishop said, and for the first time his voice carried real fury. If you expose this scandal, you destroy not only yourselves, but the faith of thousands who rely on the Church. You will give Protestants exactly what they've been waiting for, evidence to declare Catholicism corrupt. You will cripple the mission work that is bringing the gospel to the frontier. You will sacrifice countless souls for the life of one man, a man who, in the eyes of the law and the world, is not considered a person at all, but property. Is that the trade you wish to make? Just when it seemed the depth had been reached, the moral labyrinth of sacred mercy plunged even deeper. If this story has you chilled, if you feel the impossible choices crushing on every side, share this video with someone who understands that history's darkest moments defy simple judgments. Hit like to support content unafraid to confront uncomfortable truths. And make sure to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Now let's uncover how this impossible situation unfolded. What followed is preserved in conflicting testimonies, and the truth remains disputed even among the few who knew enough to dispute anything at all. The official record says that Sacred Mercy Convent closed its doors on November 3rd, 1850, due to financial hardship and the declining health of several sisters. The property was bought by a planter from Assumption Parish, who transformed the buildings into a sugar mill. The sisters were sent to various religious communities across the region. The enslaved people who served the convent, Helen, Margot, and Matias, were sold as part of the estate liquidation. This is what appeared in the diocesan records, in the legal papers filed with the parish courthouse, and in the brief notice printed in the New Orleans Catholic press was only the surface of the story. But there exists another version, one preserved only through private journals of those who were directly involved and through oral testimonies passed down in families that had reason to remember. According to those sources, the truth was far more tangled and far more dangerous than anything the official story ever hinted at. On the night of October 31st, 1850, 3 days after the Archbishop's visit, Sister Jean Baptiste slipped out of the convent grounds after Compline and made her way through the cypress grove toward the small cabin where Matias lived, kept apart from everyone else. She found him sitting on his narrow porch, working by moonlight on a piece of carpentry. carving patterns into a cypress panel with tools that looked ancient in his hands. "They mean to kill you," she said, wasting no time. Matias slowly set down his knife, though his hands didn't tremble. "I know," he replied quietly. "You know? I've known since the Archbishop arrived. Maybe even before. Men like him don't leave loose ends behind. And I'm the loosest end they've got." Sister Jean-Baptiste lowered herself onto the porch steps, her habit spreading around her like a shadow. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Somewhere in the swamp, an alligator bellowed, a sound that had become as common to her as her own breath during the years she'd spent at Sacred Mercy. "I'm sorry," she said at last, "for all of it, for what we did to you, for not having the courage to refuse what the others had already begun, for not stopping any of it before it happened, for writing that letter thinking it would bring justice when all it's brought is this." "You don't owe me an apology," Matias answered quietly. "Not to me. You thought you were doing right." "I was a coward," she whispered. "We all were. We let ourselves believe lies. We told ourselves it wasn't really sin because you weren't really, because your status somehow made it different. We twisted theology until it justified everything we wanted to do, and now you'll pay the price for our weakness." Matias lifted the knife again, turning it in the moonlight. "You gonna run?" she asked. "Where would I run to? I'm a light-skinned black man in Louisiana who can read and write. I'd be stopped at the first checkpoint, questioned, examined, without papers, without an owner to claim me. I'd be sold within a week or worse. Running isn't freedom for someone like me. It's just a slower kind of dying." "Then what will you do?" "Same thing I've been doing. Chop the wood they tell me to chop. Fix what they tell me to fix. And wait for whatever's coming." Sister Jean-Baptiste rose shakily to her feet. "I won't let them do this." "You don't have a choice," Matias said gently. "They got all the power. They always did. You're only seeing it clearly now." But what he didn't know, what no one yet knew, was that Sister Jean-Baptiste had spent the last 3 nights preparing for this moment, working by candlelight in her cell while the others slept. And what she did next would be whispered about for decades among the very few who ever learned the whole truth, though the details would change with each retelling. On the morning of November 1st, All Saints' Day, she asked for a private audience with Mother Superior Terrace. When permission was granted, she presented a document she had spent those sleepless nights writing, a full confession, signed and dated, detailing everything that had happened at Sacred Mercy. 17 pages of tightly written script. It listed the names of all who had participated, the dates she could recall, the events that had started the first transgression, and the reasons it continued. It described with cold, clinical detail how Sister Marie Thier had been the first, how the pattern spread through confession and shared guilt, how each sister twisted theology into grotesque justifications for what they were doing. But the most important part of the document was its record of the 12 children, their current locations, the families who had taken them, the money exchanged, the false stories those families had been told. It named the priests who had helped arrange those placements. It referenced the bank transactions from the convent's accounts. It offered, essentially, a complete roadmap that any investigator could follow to confirm every part of the scandal. She had made 4 copies, each one carefully reproduced in her steady handwriting. One she kept hidden inside the lining of her prayer book. The second she gave Hen, the enslaved woman who had delivered all 12 babies, with instructions written in French. Hen couldn't read, but she understood what the document meant and knew how to protect it. The third copy had already been mailed 3 days earlier to her cousin in Mobile, whose husband was a journalist with ties to abolitionist newspapers in the North. The fourth copy she now handed to Mother Superior TZ. "Insurance," she said, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "If anything happens to Matias, if he disappears, if he has an accident, if he's sold into some distant territory where no one will ever hear from him again, these documents will become public. My cousin in Mobile has instructions to forward his copy to northern newspapers. The story," she explained, would spread across every Protestant paper in the country within a month. The church would face not a local embarrassment, but a national disaster. Mother Superior TZ stared at the pages as if they were venomous. Her face had turned pale, the color of old parchment. You would destroy the church to save one man? I refuse to let the church become complicit in murder, Sister Jean Baptiste replied. There's a difference. We have already broken our vows, already brought scandal on this community. But if we add murder, if we let an innocent man be killed simply because his existence is inconvenient, then we are not just hypocrites, we are murderers. And I will not carry that sin to my grave. The Archbishop will never accept this, Mother Superior TZ said, though her voice sounded far less certain than her words. Then let him explain to the Catholic faithful how 12 consecrated women became pregnant by the same enslaved man, and why the church's solution was to eliminate the only truly innocent person in the entire story, Sister Jean Baptiste said. Let him stand before the public and defend that choice. What followed over the next 5 days happened under the strictest secrecy, behind closed doors, with only the key figures aware of just how high the stakes had become. Mother Superior TZ brought Sister Jean Baptiste's ultimatum to the Archbishop, and according to fragments of testimony later given by Father Hare, their meeting was explosive. The Archbishop threatened excommunication. He threatened to have Sister Jean Baptiste committed to an asylum. He threatened to use his influence to destroy her families, standing throughout Louisiana. But beneath all that fury was cold calculation, because he knew his position was weaker than he wanted to admit. Protestant newspapers in the North were hungry for any scandal that could tarnish Catholic credibility. The abolition movement was gaining strength, and a story involving an enslaved man and 12 white nuns would be devastating ammunition. And if it ever came out that the church had killed a man to cover the scandal, the fallout would be catastrophic. Father Hare and Father Duval, the Jesuit who had accompanied the Archbishop to Sacred Mercy, urged restraint. The original sin, they argued, could still be framed as human weakness, but premeditated murder to protect the church's reputation would be indefensible both before God and before the world. For the first days of November, the Archbishop consulted his advisors. The mathematics of power and scandal were weighed with the same careful precision someone might apply to a complicated financial negotiation. Finally, on November 5th, a compromise was reached. Sister Jean Baptiste was summoned to the convent's chapter house. The Archbishop did not sit. He stood, hands clasped behind his back, his expression carved from stone. You have placed the church in an impossible position, he said coldly. You have used threats and blackmail to force our hand. These are not the actions of a woman consecrated to God. No, Sister Jean Baptiste answered quietly. They are the actions of a woman who has already broken her vows so completely that one more sin, if it leads to justice, feels like a small price. His jaw tightened, but he went on. Nevertheless, we find ourselves bound by your arrangements. The man Matias will be manumitted. He will receive freedom papers, money, and letters of introduction to Catholic communities in the North. He will be allowed to leave Louisiana without interference. In exchange, you will surrender 3 of the 4 copies of your confession. The 4th may remain with your cousin in Mobile, but only as insurance against any future action on our part. If Matias reaches the North safely and remains unharmed, that copy is to be destroyed. Do you accept these terms? I accept them, Sister Jean Baptiste said, with one additional condition. The Archbishop's eyes narrowed sharply. You are in no position to make demands. I want to speak with Matias before he leaves. I want to explain what has been arranged and receive his consent. Otherwise, I cannot be sure he is leaving freely and not under coercion. A long silence stretched out. At last, the Archbishop gave a curt nod. You may speak with him once, in the chapel, with Father Duval present. But understand this. You and the other sisters will be sent away immediately after Matias's departure. You will go to separate convents, permanently. You will never speak of this matter again. Not to one another, not in confession, not even on your deathbeds. You will live the rest of your lives in silence and penance. This is not negotiable. I understand, Sister Jean-Baptiste said. The meeting with Matias took place on the evening of November 7th in the convent chapel. Only the eternal flame before the tabernacle and a few candles lit the room, their flickering light casting long shadows across the empty pews. Matias entered wearing new clothes, a simple brown wool suit, a white shirt, a black vest. He looked uncomfortable in formal dress, unsure where to place his hands. Sister Jean-Baptiste approached him and stopped at the distance decorum required. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "They're letting you go," she said finally. "You'll have papers, real papers, signed by the Archbishop, money to start over, letters to help you find work in Ohio or wherever you choose." Matias studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit. "Why?" he asked. "Because it's the only just outcome. Because you were innocent in all of this. Because killing you to protect our secrets would add a greater sin to the ones we have already committed. And the church agreed this out of justice?" His voice held no accusation, just a tired skepticism. "The church agreed because I made it the least damaging option," she said. "I threatened to expose everything if they harmed you. They calculated that freeing you was better than the scandal." Matias stood in silence for a moment. "So I'm free because of blackmail," he said. "You're free because sometimes the only way to make powerful people do the right thing is to make it in their own interest," she replied. "I'm not proud of the method, but I'm not ashamed of the result." "What happens to you now?" he asked. "I'll be sent to some isolated convent where I can't cause trouble. I'll spend the rest of my life in penance. But I'll be alive, and I'll be able to live with my conscience." Matias nodded, slowly. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved figure, no more than 3 inches tall, shaped from cypress wood. It was a woman in a habit, kneeling in prayer, carved with extraordinary skill. "I made this," he said, holding it out to her. "Before I knew what they were planning, I was going to leave it in the chapel as a gift. Anonymous. I figured I'd never get to give it properly." Sister Jean-Baptiste accepted the carving, her fingers closing around it gently. The craftsmanship was astonishing. Every fold of the habit perfect, the hands posed in a gesture that suggested both humility and strength. "I can't accept this," she whispered. "Not after everything we put you through. I have no right to a gift from your hands." "It ain't about right, Matias," he said. "It's about remembering that not everything that happened here was evil. There were moments, small ones, when I felt like maybe something good was trying to survive inside all this chaos. Those moments were real, too, and I need to believe they mattered, even if everything around them was falling apart." Sister Jean-Baptiste's eyes filled with tears. "You're kinder than any of us deserve. I'm tired, sister, tired of holding on to hatred. If I carry all that north with me, then this place will take more than just the years I lost here. It'll take whatever future I have left. So I'm choosing to remember that you fought for me when you didn't have to, that you risked everything to save someone most people would say isn't worth saving. That matters. That's what I'm bringing with me." They stood in silence a moment more. Then Matias gave a single nod, turned, and walked out of the chapel, his footsteps echoing against the wooden floor until the sound faded into the night. Sister Jean-Baptiste stayed seated in the pew, the carved figurine clasped tight in her hands, until Father Duval gently touched her shoulder and said it was time to return to her cell. On November 8th, 1850, Matias walked down Shell Road from Sacred Mercy for the final time. He carried a canvas bag with his new clothes, his freedom papers wrapped carefully in oilcloth, $50 in coin, a significant amount for any newly freed man, and letters of introduction addressed to Catholic communities in Cincinnati and Cleveland. The Archbishop's secretary had also written a formal letter describing Matias as a man of good character and strong work ethic, seeking to begin a new life in freedom. Several people saw him leave. Ms. Guidry, drinking his morning coffee on the gallery, noticed a tall figure walking toward town and recorded it in his journal with short remark. The colored man from Sacred Mercy left this morning, carrying what looked like travel belongings. He did not look back or around, but walked with the steady intention of a man who knows exactly where he is going. At the St. Martinville landing, Matias bought a ticket on the steamboat Teche Belle, heading for New Orleans. The manifest listed him as Matias Duval, a free man of color, destination Cincinnati. The surname was new, possibly chosen from the name of the street where the convent stood, or maybe something that held meaning only to him. The Teche Belle departed at 3 p.m., its paddle wheel beating against the brown bayou water as it made its way toward the Mississippi, then north, toward a future Matias could barely imagine, but was determined to claim. He was never seen in Louisiana again. The 12 Sisters of Sacred Mercy were dispersed within the week, exactly as the Archbishop ordered. Each was assigned to a different convent across the South and as far north as Maryland, with strict instructions never to contact one another or speak of their years at Sacred Mercy. Mother Superior Turs Barron was sent to a Carmelite monastery in Kentucky, where the rule of strict enclosure meant she would spend the rest of her life behind walls no woman could leave once she entered. She died there in the winter of 1868, keeping absolute silence about Sacred Mercy for 18 years. The only record of her last words came from the sister who attended her final moments, who said Mother Turs whispered, "Forgive us," 3 times before her breath stopped. To whom or for what she asked forgiveness was never explained. Sister Merritt, the first to break her vows, was assigned to a teaching convent in Baltimore. She spent 23 years teaching daughters of Irish and German immigrants, reading, writing, catechism. Letters preserved in the archives say she was an excellent teacher, but unusually quiet, never offering anything about her past, and quickly changing the subject if anyone mentioned her previous posting. She died of consumption in 1873 at age 56 and was buried beneath a simple stone bearing only her religious name and the dates of her birth and death. Sister Annelick, the youngest and the mother of the last child born at Sacred Mercy, was sent to a mission convent in Arkansas, serving Creek Indians and scattered white settlers. Life there was harsh. The nuns lived in crude cabins, survived on cornmeal and salt pork, and faced constant threats from illness and occasional violence. Sister Annelick lasted 7 years before malaria weakened her beyond recovery, transferred to a larger convent in Little Rock. She died in 1859 at age 32. Her final letter to the Mother Superior held one cryptic line: "I have paid what I owed, and I am ready to face my judge." Sister Jean Baptiste was sent to the most isolated mission the Archbishop could find, deep in the Alabama wilderness, 40 miles from the nearest town, where 2 elderly nuns served scattered farmers and the last remnants of displaced Indian tribes. She arrived in November 1850 and remained there for 34 years, until her death in 1884. The conditions at the Alabama mission were unforgiving. The sisters lived in a log house with gaps in the walls that let in wind and rain. They grew their own crops, hauled their own water, made their own candles and soap. Jean Baptiste, once the daughter of a prosperous notary, learned to split wood, plant and harvest corn, and heal wounds with forest herbs. But she also wrote. Despite the isolation and physical hardship, she kept detailed journals for decades. She wrote in French, in Latin, sometimes in English when corresponding with local authorities. She translated religious texts into Greek with help from native speakers. And most importantly, she recorded in detail everything that happened at Sacred Mercy, not as confession, not as defense, but simply as testimony to events she believed must not vanish into the safety of silence. She kept the manuscript in her possession until the day she died. What happened to it afterward remains uncertain. The elderly nun who stayed with Sister Jean Baptiste during her final hours said the document had been wrapped in oilcloth and handed to a traveling priest, with instructions to deliver it to someone who would recognize its importance. Whether he followed those instructions, whether the manuscript survived the journey, whether it ever reached the person it was meant for, none of that is known. Sister Jean Baptiste died on a cold February morning in 1884 at the age of 65. According to the brief death notice sent to the diocese, her final words were, "I did what I could. God will judge whether it was enough." The 12 children born from the impossible unions at Sacred Mercy lived their lives scattered across the South, each one carrying in their very bodies the evidence of scandal that had been buried with deliberate care. Their paths diverged widely depending on where they were placed, the families who raised them, and the color of their skin. The child born to Sister Genevieve in October 1846, the first baby, a girl, was placed with a wealthy Creole family in New Orleans. She was raised as their own daughter, taught by private tutors, and married at 17 to the son of another prominent family. She had 5 children and died in 1901, never knowing her mother had been a nun or that her father had been enslaved. Her descendants inherited her light eyes and strong cheekbones, traits that surfaced unexpectedly in later generations without anyone understanding their origin. The child born to Sister Marie Claire, a boy whose darker complexion prevented him from being absorbed into white society, was placed with a free black family in Baton Rouge who operated a cooperative business. He learned the trade, worked with his hands, and married a free woman of color at 23. During Reconstruction, he briefly entered local politics, serving on a parish committee until the rise of Jim Crow laws pushed men like him out of public roles. He died in 1898, having lived long enough to witness the rollback of nearly every gain Reconstruction had offered. But he died a free man, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried his name. The child born to Sister Angelique, the last baby, delivered on the Feast of the Assumption, was placed with family in Natchez. They later moved west of Texas in 1855, seeking opportunity in the newly opened territories. The boy grew up in San Antonio, worked as a ranch hand, learned to break horses and repair fences. He fought in the Civil War on the Confederate side, conscripted like many men of ambiguous racial background who could pass when necessary but had no power to refuse service. He survived the war, returned to Texas, and eventually disappeared into the anonymity of the American West. Some records hint he may have traveled California, but his trail fades out in the 1870s. 3 of the 12 children died young, 2 from yellow fever during the epidemic of 1853, 1 from scarlet fever in 1854. Their graves bore simple stones that told no lies but revealed no truths, marked only with names, dates, and a familiar inscription: "Suffer the little children to come unto me." The remaining 6 grew into adulthood, married, raised children of their own. Some believed they were orphans. Others assumed they were the illegitimate children of planters and enslaved or free black mistresses, a story so common in Louisiana it stirred little curiosity. None ever knew the full truth of their origins, and by the time they were old enough to ask deeper questions, those who might have answered were dead, scattered, or bound by vows of silence so strict that even on their deathbeds they said nothing. Still, the genetic echoes remained. Light eyes in families that had always known only dark ones, unexpectedly straight hair appearing among tightly curled textures, unusual height that seemed to come from nowhere. These traits passed quietly down through generations, noted but not understood, with no context to explain their meaning. As for Matias, his fate became a matter of rumor and fragment of evidence. The Freedom Papers issued in Louisiana gave him legal status, but could not shield him from precarious reality faced by any black man in America, free or enslaved. Life in the North was better than the South, but it was no paradise. Hella, the elderly enslaved woman who delivered all 12 of the babies at Sacred Mercy, maintained connections within the free black communities across Louisiana and into neighboring states. She had been freed after the convent's closure, an outcome Sister Jean Baptiste demanded during negotiations with the Archbishop, and she lived with her daughter Margot in New Orleans until her death in 1862. Before she died, Hella sometimes received news passed through networks of free people of color, information carried by travelers, letters, and the informal routes connecting distant black communities. She told Margot that she'd heard Matias had reached Cincinnati safely, found work as a carpenter, and married with children. Whether this was truth or simply the hope she chose to believe is uncertain. What is certain is that in the 1860 Cincinnati census, there's a listing for Matias Duval, mulatto, carpenter, age 37, living with a wife named Sarah and 3 children. The ages match. The occupation matches. The name is the same. If this man was indeed the Matias who left Louisiana in 1850, and the circumstantial evidence strongly suggests he was, then he succeeded in building the life he'd been denied for so long, a family bearing his name, children born free instead of enslaved, work he was paid for, and a community that recognized him as a man rather than property. From Cincinnati, he would have witnessed the Civil War unfold. He would have seen refugees flee north, heard the news of Lee's surrender and Lincoln's assassination, experienced a brief hope of Reconstruction and the betrayal that followed. Church records from St. Xavier Parish in Cincinnati show Matias Duval attending Mass regularly through the 1860s and 1870s, serving on committees to assist formerly enslaved people who had fled north. A receipt book from a Cincinnati furniture workshop lists payments to M. Duval for custom carpentry work in 1871 and 1873. A marriage record from 1875 notes the union of Marie Duval, daughter of Matias Duval, to Thomas Freeman, a laborer. These fragments suggest a life lived quietly and productively, in a kind of anonymity that allowed a man to build something lasting out of the wreckage of his past. If this was indeed Matias, and the preponderance of evidence suggests it was, then he lived to the age of 61, dying in Cincinnati in the winter of 1884, the same year Sister Jean Baptiste passed away in Alabama. His death certificate listed pneumonia as the cause of death and recorded that he was survived by a wife, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. A brief obituary in the Cincinnati Gazette described him as a respected craftsman and valued member of St. Xavier Parish, missed by his family and community. There was no mention of Louisiana, no reference to Sacred Mercy, no hint of the 12 children he had fathered under circumstances beyond his control. To the people of Cincinnati, he was simply a freed man who had made good, one of thousands who built new lives in the North. The building that had housed Sacred Mercy stood empty for several years after its closure, slowly deteriorating in Louisiana's humid climate. Locals avoided it, though whether this was from superstition or mere indifference is unclear. In 1855, the property was purchased by a planter named Eshin Budrow, who converted it into a sugar processing facility. The chapel was stripped of its religious furnishings, the stained glass windows sold to a church in Baton Rouge, and the altar dismantled. The building burned to the ground in 1867 during the chaos of Reconstruction. Parish records list the cause as unknown, though fires were common in that turbulent period and rarely investigated thoroughly. Some whispered that Confederate sympathizers had sought to punish Budrow for cooperating with Union authorities. Others suggested that former slaves, aware of the building's history, wanted it erased. The truth, like so much from that era, vanished into the smoke. The foundations remained visible for years, slowly reclaimed by the swamp. The cemetery at the far edge of property survived, its iron fence rusting but intact, its stones marking the graves of sisters who had died before the scandal and of stillborn children from planter families. By the 1890s, even the foundations had disappeared beneath the relentless growth of Louisiana vegetation. Sacred Mercy's location became a matter of speculation and fading memory. Elderly residents of St. Martinville could vaguely point north and say the convent was somewhere that way, but precise locations were lost as the first-hand witnesses died. The scandal that the Archbishop had feared never fully surfaced, at least not during the lifetimes of those involved. The story persisted only in whispers, passed down within families who had reason to remember. Descendants of Hella, the woman who delivered the babies, relatives of the sisters who knew something had gone terribly wrong, members of the 12 families who had received the children, all occasionally noticing peculiarities that didn't align with the explanations they had been given. The church survived as it had countless times before, through silence, dispersal, and the systematic erasure of inconvenient evidence. Official records remain pristine, untainted by impropriety. Sacred Mercy appeared in diocesan records and histories as simply another small convent that had operated briefly before financial difficulties forced its closure. Unremarkable, unmemorable, unworthy of investigation. Yet evidence persisted in fragments. The bill of sale for Matias survives in estate records. Baptismal certificates for some of the children show details inconsistent with their supposed origins. Matias's freedom papers, filed with the parish courthouse, bear unusual levels of detail and an archbishop's signature on a document that normally would have required only a magistrate's approval. Letters of introduction, some preserved in church archives where Matias presented them, requested assistance in ways suggesting circumstances more complicated than a straightforward manumission. These fragments, scattered through archives and private collections, held little meaning for most who encountered them. Their significance was understood only by those who could connect them to the larger story, and those few were deliberately dispersed in silence, bound by vows or by prudence to carry their knowledge to the grave. Somewhere in the cypress swamps of Louisiana, beneath water, rot, and the endless cycle of growth and decay, lie the physical traces of Sacred Mercy. The bricks of its foundations, the iron of its fences, the stones of its cemetery. And somewhere in the bloodlines of America, in Louisiana, Texas, Ohio, California, and beyond, live the genetic descendants of what occurred there, carry within them the inheritance of 12 women who renounced motherhood and one man who was given no choice in his fatherhood. The scandal remained buried, as the archbishop intended, but truth, like water finding its way through limestone, continued to seep through the carefully constructed barriers of silence. It emerged in family stories that didn't quite make sense, in genetic traits appear without explanation, in documents surviving when they should have been destroyed, in the stubborn human need to understand origins, even when those origins are forbidden knowledge. Sister Jean Baptiste, writing in her isolated mission in Alabama, understood this. She wrote in one of her journals, "Truth is more persistent than power. We may bury it, may threaten those who speak it, may create elaborate structures of silence to contain it, but truth is patient. It waits, and eventually, in ways we cannot predict or control, it surfaces, not. Truth is not always revealed in the form we expect, nor always at the moment it could do the most good, but it surfaces nonetheless. Truth is what remains when all the lies have been forgotten." What happened at Sacred Mercy between 1845 and 1850 was a scandal born at the intersection of slavery, religious authority, human weakness, and institutional power. It was enabled by a system that made some people property and gave others absolute control over that property. It was perpetuated by isolation, by the particular psychology of closed religious communities, and by the ways that transgression by one person makes transgression by others seem less impossible. It was covered up through threats, dispersal, and a calculated erasure of evidence. It was also, in its strange and terrible way, a story of resistance. Sister Jean Baptiste's refusal to let Matias be murdered was itself a form of resistance, imperfect compromise, achieved through blackmail rather than righteousness, but resistance nonetheless. Her insistence that his life mattered more than the church's reputation challenged the fundamental logic of institutional self-protection that has governed powerful organizations since the beginning of recorded history. The 12 children born at Sacred Mercy grew up, had children of their own, and those children had children until the bloodlines dispersed across the country and mixed with others, making them nearly impossible to track. They lived ordinary lives. Some prospered, some struggled, some died young, some lived old age. They were farmers and merchants, teachers and laborers, soldiers and ministers. Their origins left no mark except in subtle variations of features and complexion, the quiet evidence of complex ancestries. Somewhere in the north, in a cemetery in Cincinnati, there may lie the grave of Matias Duval, marked with simple stone noting a life of 61 years. The exact age for a man who was 22 when he was purchased for Sacred Mercy in 1845. Whether anyone who visited that grave knew the full story of the man buried there is doubtful. But the stone remains, as stones do, marking a life that was lived despite everything that tried to prevent it, a testament to survival, if not to justice. This is what we know of sacred mercy, assembled from fragments and testimony, from whispered stories and surviving documents, from the stubborn persistence of truth even in the face of institutional power determined to suppress it. The full story may never be recovered. Too many records were destroyed, too many witnesses died with their knowledge, too many threads lead to dead ends. Yet enough survives to show that something extraordinary and terrible happened in that convent in the Louisiana swamp, something the church tried desperately to erase and only partially succeeded. The story persisted in fragments, in whispers, in the bloodlines of descendants who carry the genetic evidence of events their ancestors tried to bury. This history reminds us that even the most carefully guarded secrets rarely disappear completely. Truth seeps through the barriers we construct, emerges in unexpected places, and refuses to be entirely buried. Sacred mercy was hidden well enough that it never became the national scandal the Archbishop feared during the lifetimes of those involved, but not well enough to vanish entirely. Evidence survived, scattered and fragmentary, but real. What do you think of this story? Could such a thing really have happened in the shadowed corners of American religious history, hidden behind the respectable facade of a teaching convent in Louisiana? Was Sister Jean-Baptiste's method of protecting Matias, through blackmail, threats, and willingness to expose the church to scandal, justified by the circumstances? Or did she simply trade one form of coercion for another? And what do we owe to the descendants of the 12 children who lived and died without ever knowing the truth of their origins? Leave your thoughts below and share what you think about this complex story of power, guilt, survival, and the limits of institutional silence. If this exploration of a hidden scandal compelled you, if it made you think about how power operates and who pays the price when the powerful protect themselves, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who appreciates history's darker truths. The past is never as simple as we wish it were, and the stories that make us most uncomfortable are often the ones most worth remembering, because they teach us something essential about human nature and the structures of power that shape our lives. See you in the next video.